welcome to the Huddle Breakdown with me, Laura Bradburn. I am joined as always by James and Alan. James, palm trees on the shirt, man. Is it not a bit early for that?
No, it's been hot here.
Wow.
So I'm getting ready to have our pool opened next week and plop my fat ass next to it seasonally, as I am apt to do. So I'm starting to put myself in the headspace. Although the forecast is, of course, supposed to get colder and rainy the first week it's open. But
so should you get on the trumpet and national anthem and you hoist the flag and all that when you open the pool? Is that?
No, just pay my friend Doug to take care of it, because I've been known to be a complete mess when it comes to chemical balances. So my friend Doug takes care of it and sets me up.
This probably sounds like a comment on life in general, really. Yeah.
Generally speaking, most things, absolutely. I'm a crazy outsourcer, getting other people to do things I'm horrible at.
It was a chemical imbalance that you were suffering from.
That too.
Yeah. I was more relating to it, but yeah.
Listen, I'm the last person
it's a family show.
Yeah, I'm the last person to ever go to anybody for a chemical imbalance, that's for sure. I found myself doing the barras on Saturday, getting well oiled on Inch's cider, and it was rather lovely. It was rather lovely. I was out with work colleagues. Their level of respect for me, if it was ever above zero, is now firmly below that. But we'll leave that there, and we'll perhaps talk about it another day. Alan, I'll come to you first. We're obviously post the Glasgow derby this weekend. Listen, we could debate over and over about the merits or not of singing Simply the Best. I don't think that's for us to discuss. But it was quite funny while it happened. What was your thoughts on the game overall?
No, well, listen, I mean, by all accounts, Tina Turner was a fine woman who's, with a fine moral compass. I always imagine she'd be horrified to know that her tune had been adopted by that particular subculture. So I think it's about time it got taken back for Tina. Take it back for Tina. There you go. That's the new campaign. Taking it back for Tina. There's got to be a song in there. So yeah, that was good. I mean, better than the game, it has to be said. Incredibly frustrating game, really. We'll get into the nuts and bolts of it, but yeah, that was my overriding impression. Massively frustrating. I think the game was there for Celtic to win very comfortably, and they pretty much butchered every opportunity that they had, and there was plenty to create danger, create chances. I didn't know what they were trying to do. I genuinely didn't know what they were trying to do tactically. I think we'd done a good job, if I say so myself, defining, cataloguing, and labelling Nedball. I thought we're pretty accurate about what it was, what it looked like, what it smelt like, what it felt like, and that went in the bin. So what's that all about? I mean, didn't understand what they were trying to do. We had so many opportunities to create. I'm not talking about chances, direct chances. So many opportunities to create chances, which we absolutely butchered, nearly all of them. So a very frustrating game. That's my kind of slightly miserablest take on it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with most of what you said. I'm not sure I'll ever get to grips with the smell of Nedball, and I don't know that I ever want to. But I take you at your word. James, it was a frustrating one, I think, from my point of view, because in a lot of ways, Rangers did what Rangers do. They kind of sat off us and attempted to catch us on the counter-attack, which was successful on one occasion. And we just struggled to break them down the way we struggle to break down a lot of teams in the league. I think that's what's frustrating me, is they are playing against us the way a lot of other teams in the league play against us, with the exception that they will occasionally go for the counter-attack. What was your thoughts on what you saw overall?
Yeah, I thought it was not the underlying performance that Alan's pointed was kind of, there was a lot of ways it could have broken Celtic's direction that didn't happen for mostly our own fault. But I thought I'm resolute in saying that neither team deserved to win that game. It was an abomination overall. It was just horrible. I agree. I agree with Alan as far as not sure what they were trying to do, and a lot of the things that we kind of hoped for that maybe we were going to adjust. Rodgers took Alan's theory on the Dundee United opening and shot it to crap because we didn't play that way. We didn't really, we didn't launch balls. We didn't. Right. That's exactly right. It was in many ways almost the an underlying performance data. It was like the opposite of the game at Celtic Park, in the sense that the XG kind of flipped. The big difference for them is that they had great finishing in that game, and this game they didn't. Balogun's header, that's kind of analogous to Raskin's header in the game at Celtic Park. It's like, well, that one went in. It was a great finish. This one was like a much easier chance and a crap finish, right? So there was kind of that flipping of that. But other than that, and the shape being different, they were in some kind of maybe 4-4-2 diamond, but it was, like Alan said, kind of all over the map. Couldn't really figure out what their structure was supposed to be, other than Bajrami was in McGregor's back pocket the entire game when he was on. But outside of that, it was kind of very, it was much more jazz than it was classical, in the sense that couldn't figure out what they were trying to do. So, but we did, we still couldn't do anything against it for the most part. I mean, it was, as Alan said, we got to those moments and just didn't quite put things together. So the tactics were actually kind of similar to the last game. Only the teams were just, dead rubber, not really much in it. Which again, in fairness, from a human level, this is what we've talked about in recent weeks. Like, you get it. And we all try to project these things onto these guys. And it's a definition of insanity. Every season we do this, and almost every season these games end up like this. So it's just the way it goes. And then, throw in some of the variables like Maeda flying all over the world. He's like a freaking astronaut returning to Earth after a day commute to the moon. I'm fair to, I get it, like why he's doing it. I'm not judging. It's just, he played like a guy that had traveled the entire span of the Earth in a week. So yeah, just a hot mess.
Yeah, that analogy of it being more jazz than classical is very fitting. I mean, they do love to play a flute or two, and very often, if you don't know what
Ron Burgundy jazz flute.
Oh, very much so, very much so. The Ron Burgundy of Scottish football, I'll give them that. Alan, I guess what's coming through from what you both said there, and you can maybe expand on this as we get into a little bit more of the detail, is it's probably hard for Brendan to come up with a game plan against a team if he doesn't know. It's one of those situations. If their own manager doesn't know what they're going to do, then how are we supposed to know what they're going to do, kind of thing. So do you think that maybe contributed a little bit to us not really being able to manage them in maybe the way that we would have wanted to?
Yes, that sort of, I don't know what I'm doing, certainly was true to the spirit of netball, if nothing else was. But no, I disagree with that. I think we were just really poor for a variety of reasons, especially on the ball. And I think what was actually quite sobering from this game, and maybe not a surprise, but we've kind of we've spent years almost, certainly the last 2 seasons for sure, bemoaning the left-hand side of the defence, and then we get these kind of athletic, muscular dudes, as James would call them, and then suddenly we fall in love with Scales and Taylor again because, well, they're quite good at moving the ball forward. But I think this was a horrible reminder of why we've thought what we did all this time, sadly. And then on the right-hand side, other than McGregor, who I think in terms of role and specifics of what he does is essentially irreplaceable in the team. The area of the team that has the largest drop-off between starter and second is the right-hand side of the team. The drop between Johnson and Ralston is a big one. And Forrest, although he is clever and quite safe on the ball and intelligent in his movement and his decision making, simply doesn't have the high end explosiveness that Kuhn does to blast past people, to get shots in quickly. And Forrest, in his nature, is quite a bit more of a safe player anyway.
Careful, Alan. That's our most decorated player you're talking about there.
Well, I'm talking about 33-year-old Forrest. Not, he still has utility, but he was obviously couldn't play for more than 60 minutes and a half. The times that we've seen him, I know he's coming back from a long injury, but it looks like 60 minutes is probably his maximum anyway. So that means that probably from about 50 minutes, for 10 of those 60 minutes, he's kind of regressing in terms of his physical impact on the pitch. And the problem was, and the reason I've called out those two areas of the team, is that that's where all the opportunity was. And actually, again, I disagree with you slightly. I think Celtic very quickly realised that if they switched the ball side to side quickly, they could stretch this team. And they very quickly cottoned on to the fact that the two fullbacks were virtually always free. And I thought whether that was Rodgers or whether the team were just smart enough to realise that's where the opportunities were. But then on the right-hand side, Ralston was too slow, too hesitant. He had one moment in the first half where he got the ball 3/4 of the way inside their half with nobody around him for like 10 yards. And he just hesitated and he thought, and he kind of looked up and he went, oh, shit, what do I do? No. And I think maybe then him and Forrest might have played a bit of a 1-2 together. But, the difference between the dynamism of Johnson bombing up and down, of Kuhn and Johnson linking, of the speed and athleticism with which they attacked teams was just stark. And then on the other side, Taylor had a tremendous about the ball and generally fucked it up every time he got it. I mean, he gave the ball away at least 9 times in the first half from open play. He just butchered so many chances to release Maeda, for example. Just gave the ball away with his passing when he had time and space on the ball over and over and over again. There's a couple of times he even drove forward, got into the final third, stopped and went backwards. It was like, no, infuriating. You got Adam Idah, at least make them defend. At least do something. So normally when I look at the data for these games, the packing series of metrics are a very strong indicator of, who's had a good game, if you want to kind of call it that. But in this case, the two fullbacks had the highest packing scores, and I would argue probably were the worst defenders in terms of butchering opportunities for the team. And I think it was somebody on Twitter X, I'm sorry I've forgotten who it was, made a very good point, was that you don't realise how much Kuhn and Johnson are the fulcrum of that right-hand side attack. And Engels does an awful lot of filling in. He just kind of, he does a job for the team where he sits in and he defends the space that Johnson has left. And I thought that was an astute observation as well, by the way. Engels had a very good first half, and then he faded really badly in the second half. So you've got Maeda, who's jet lagged. God knows, poor guy's been to Japan and back in less than a week. You've got Forrest, who is limited in what he can give you now from a dynamism and speed perspective, and then you've got Adam Idah giving the most Adam Idah performance that you could possibly imagine in terms of just he's such a mixed bag, isn't he? He's such a mixed bag. Poor decisions, great instinctive play on occasions. So all of that adds up to a very disjointed performance. And I just felt, especially in the first half, we had so many great opportunities out wide to do something and to create real trouble for them. And by and large, we didn't deliver on it. So that's why I said there was that kind of level of frustration. We'll get to the good points later, because I thought there was one player that I want to pick out that I thought really, really kind of shone, actually. And I want to talk about the goalkeeper as well, but we'll come on to that one.
Yeah, well, James, we'll come to you on some of the points that Alan's made there and whether you agree or disagree with him. We'll probably start, I think, with Adam Idah, just because, to be totally frank, I was doing basically I was doing what I did 2 years ago to Adam Idah. It didn't matter what good he did. It didn't matter how effective he was at any point. I had decided he was an absolute liability, and therefore I would berate him at every chance. But to give Idah his credit, and I've always said this at the Aston Villa game and things like that, when he's doing things instinctively without having to think, he is at his best. When he's swinging a leg at it because he sees an opportunity, that's when he's most dangerous. When he's got too much time to make a decision, he usually makes the wrong one. Am I being too harsh?
I don't think so. In many ways, he shares a lot with what Giakoumakis brought to the table. And I've said that before. I don't think he's quite as good as Giakoumakis was as far as that instinctive finishing, but I think he's good in that way. But similarly, he's probably a little better than Giakoumakis in dropping deep and, adding something in build-up. But again, directionally, he's similar. So it's when you take it all together, they're kind of similar players with just a little bit different strengths and weaknesses, but related. And I put a graphic in our chat area on huddlebreakdown.com, and it was basically a normal distribution of every time that Adam Idah has touched the ball within 60 yards of our own goal. Okay, so that's like a line I drew in the sand as far as build up, right? So he's not attacking in that sense. So a lot of time his back's going to be to goal, and when he's under pressure. And I did a distribution, and basically the average outcome increased the odds of the opposition scoring, not Celtic. And the skew of that,
you may well make that face.
Right. And the skew of it was negative too, which is that there was a couple of outliers that were positive, but the clustering, because again, normal distribution's the bell curve, but you have to look at the nature of what an average is and how it's created and what the skew is in the distribution. And the skew's also negative. So, again, it's only a little over a season now. But I think the weight of the evidence suggests that, and I've said this for a while now, because again, this is not something new. This was also evident in his time at Norwich, in my opinion, when I looked at him when we signed him initially, is he's a miscast actor. He's being asked to play a role as this hold up big physical striker. He is big, but he's not all that physical. He's not a guy that gets into physical tussles and wins. There's an advanced metric on aerial duels, and his isn't great. Like, he's not great in physical 1-to-1 battles. Like Kyogo, it's not like he can't finish a header inside the 6-yard box when he's uncontested. Like, he's athletic enough to do that. He's very good in that circumstance. But as far as that physical battle, I mean, I noticed, I commented in the chat on this too during the game. I think he was the blocker on our corners. Like, our supposed striker, who's the big physical change-up, hold-up striker, is not being set up to be an attacking header on our corners. He's the one blocking the keeper. It's like, what? I don't understand. Well, I mean, I get it, but he's also the guy that's supposed to be winning battles with center backs to hold up aerial balls when we need that. So
yeah, you would think if he's been asked to do that job outfield, then that physical job outfield, then he would be a goal threat from set pieces.
One would think.
Yeah.
That would be my logical deduction. So it's a bit scatterbrain in that regard. So again, I keep saying, if we used him the way, Kyogo was used as a striker under Ange Ball, and into a large degree also under Rodgers, kind of minimalist, inside the box finisher, not involved all that much on the ball and creating or in build-up, then I think he has a lot of utility. But I just haven't seen any evidence that's, including the manager's comments going into the game, when he once again characterized him in this role that I think he's being miscast at. And again, the evidence in this game was, once again, not really helping our cause when he's being asked. On occasion he does, right? But on average, and the skew is that the more he's involved in build-up, the worse it is for for our chances of scoring.
And what was your thoughts on the defences? Alan was saying Scales and Taylor didn't have their best game. Ralston really is quite a downgrade from Johnston. You know, there was a lot of missed opportunities, as Alan said, for chances to be created, and it really made you realise, I think, how much we utilise the fullbacks to help in an attacking sense.
Yeah, I'll start with the positive first, uncharacteristically for me. Is we didn't have any of those, like, other than the one pass back from Ralston, which thankfully didn't turn into a disaster. For the most part, we didn't commit those glaring, you know, the Taylor pass right to Diomande centrally, you know, that had happened in a prior game. Those kind of brazen, horrible mistakes we didn't have. Sinisalo didn't really, like, his mistakes were out of play, which, again, in the grand scheme of things. So we were actually doing a really good job, as Alan said, taking out their first line of press. Like, they were forcing us to bypass McGregor because they basically sacrificed Bajrami as a, you know, that was his job. Like, he really wasn't doing anything else on the pitch other than shadow McGregor. And I mean, you're talking about Tierney and Dessers, who are not exactly quick, athletic dynamos in a movement sense. So we were just bypassing them out wide to the fullbacks, and the fullbacks were doing a good job getting into those areas. And I thought the people on that first line, whether that was Carter Vickers, Sinisalo, or Scales, were actually doing a good job getting it to him. So that connection in buildup was actually better. And Hatate, more so in the second half, but also some in the second half, was also dropping. So I think our approach to their buildup was better than it has been because we didn't have the kind of mistakes. And again, in fairness, they were more chaotic and less structured, well structured. It was kind of more of a hot mess, as I said. But then going from there, that was the problem. So we got it into those good spaces out wide and took out their first line, and then it all kind of fell apart from there. And I agree with Alan, like the fact that we didn't capitalize on how bad Balogun and Jefty were on their left side.
Oh, Jefty.
Yeah, just cute.
Can I just say, I don't know if I've just not paid attention to him. He is awful. Really
on the
awful.
Ball, he is awful. Yep.
Yeah. No. He's going to Chelsea, though. Do you know?
Yeah, and Raskin's going to Real Madrid, I think. Yeah.
No, that's Sigurman, the substitute striker.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. I mean, I just can imagine Raskin booting the life out of people playing for Real Madrid the way that he was on Sunday, but that's
Raskin's. I mean, he's on a real purple patch of form, but his career there has basically followed that of John Lundstrom, where for 6 months he's been excellent, but before that he was in and out of the team because his attitude stank, and the manager couldn't trust him. Two managers couldn't trust him. Now he's fair play. He's put together a really good body of work for a 6-month period, but I can almost guarantee, a la Lundstrom, if there are any rumours of big moves, They should
hit that bid so fast there it'll spin your head.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And if history is anything to go by, they always hate them in the end, don't they? You know, Lundstrom. Oh God, I can't even remember. I can only remember him as TikTok. Todd Cantwell hated him in the end.
I did say that on. I think it was nearly on day one. It was not far off day one.
Yeah,
I did. Yeah. They'll hate him in the end.
I can see that going that way. Let's get back to Celtic. Alan, you had a particular player that you wanted to single out for some praise. Who was it, and why was that the case?
Yeah, well, I mean, really, Rio Hatate, and James has kind of touched on this a little bit. What we saw from Rio Hatate on that in this game, and a big game, was a tactical maturity I've just very rarely seen, which I thought was really impressive. And the reason I say that is because he was still, when Celtic were set in their shape defensively, he was still the first point of press. But when Celtic were on the ball, he was helping McGregor out, and he was helping the centre backs out, and he was being a really good teammate, and he displayed again, as James pointed out very, very well, that he was quite press resistant. Actually, he's not obviously not a big guy, but he's relatively strong for his size. But he just has those little movements that he makes, even against bigger players, that he can just wriggle himself out of contact quite well, and he was doing that. So it's just, if you think about, a player who's having to be the point of the press, essentially with the striker, and be the one that helps drop deep and build the play, that takes an awful lot of, not just energy, it takes an awful lot of tactical decision-making maturity, is the word I used, to really, to think, where do I need to be on the pitch at any one time? What is it that I'm expected to do? I just thought he was excellent in both of those. We know he's not a pressing machine, right? He never will be. He doesn't have the pace, but I thought especially, dropping back, helping McGregor, because McGregor, was man-marked and really didn't get on the ball very much at all. I thought that Hatate and Engels were being man-marked, but I think I was wrong about that, because on occasions they were just in acres of space with nobody near them. So I have no idea what Barron and Diomande were what their instructions were. But no, I thought he was very good. There wasn't a lot in the final third again, particularly, but just in terms of, I think all the positives in Celtic were the sort of deep build up, and then it kind of fell apart as we got anywhere near goal, unfortunately. But it's just something I've not seen from Hatate. I mean, I've been critical of him, really sort of three things: consistency, obviously, and he seems to almost pick and choose his games a little bit. Secondly is that, again, sort of tactically, James mentioned earlier, sort of playing jazz in an orchestra. He seems to do his own thing to his own tune, at his own pace and his own time. And the third thing for me is that sometimes he just slows the game down. Like Celtic are trying to build an attack, and then it just stops when it reaches Hatate, and he seems to just slow the game down a lot. So that's why I was really, really encouraged to see that display on the weekend there. And as I say, tactical maturity is the way I would characterise it. I thought he was a real standout.
You were suggesting there you didn't know what the instructions were for some of the Rangers players. We all know what the instrusttions were. It was, get in about them, show them you're there.
Yeah, run about and snarl. I mean, we by the data, we proved that running about and snarling was the actual, it's the only improvements that have been.
Get your brogues polished and kick them up the backside or something like that. Something more fruity than that, I imagine.
Can we talk about the goalkeeper as well?
Yes.
I'm not particularly anything. I don't think there's anything particularly eye-catching. Other than I've just noticed the last two games, Sinisalo's been a lot more ambitious with his passing. That's been nice to see. He's been a lot more positive with his passing. Not quite as safe as he has been in his first few games. But my question on the back of an opinion is that, for me, if he continues to play the way he is, and actually it's a very small sample, he's not ripping up trees, as in, I think I think Schmeichel has still got a better goals saved above average, which is, than Sinisalo, which I think is a key metric. I don't think Sinisalo's really, it's not like he's saved 3 goals over average or anything like that. But he's certainly been competent, and he's certainly been, adaptive to the style successfully. If he continues to be fit and continues to show that form, to me, you keep playing him, and you say to him that the shirt is yours until you lose form. And I just think that would be, and I think you can imagine having somebody as driven as Kasper Schmeichel pushing you for your place. I think that would be quite interesting to see. But just interested in you guys' take on that.
I'll jump in first before I hear James's thoughts. But I'm fully on board with a player having to earn their shirt back. If they go out injured or anything like it, then and Sinisalo comes in and doesn't do a Scott Bain basically and throw the ball in his own net a few times, then I see no reason why we don't carry on with him, because that's got to be the plan in the long term, hasn't it? So, James, what's your thoughts on that, and Kasper Schmeichel potentially having to warm the bench a little bit more next season?
Well, for me, it should be a relatively easy decision for the rest of this season, meaning that I just don't see, given how well he's playing, to try and rush Schmeichel back in order to make the cup final. I just don't, I don't get that. Meaning that even if he's able to do it from a fitness perspective, the idea that he's going to be on tune sharp for a cup final, I think is almost impossible. And it would be unfair to expect him to be. So I think that's the low hanging fruit. Then you just go into preseason and you have a full preseason and you see who wins the job. Now, I'm skeptical that the thumb wouldn't be on the balance for Schmeichel, but so I suspect it probably won't happen, but I suspect Schmeichel will be the starter, even if he doesn't quote unquote deserve it in the competition in preseason. I think this is only good though, and I think what it does inform is that we've talked about this, given Schmeichel's age and kind of physical profile, and now he's going to be coming off a major injury. To have an option there to have a quicker hook, so you don't turn into Alan McGregor, in his last season, where he just, or Craig Gordon at Hearts this season, where you just keep rolling a guy out who's, like a facsimile of their former self, and have it do real detrimental harm to the performance of the team needlessly. In the case of, in this circumstance, it would be needless because we would have a legitimate, in theory, again, if there's always always the scenario where this is not sustainable and that, he's not what we're hoping he is, and we're projecting stuff that's not going to be there. But I'm in agreement with Alan. Like, I think so far it's been very kind of, it's hard not to get optimistic about what he's been showing. So yeah, I would say my base case would be Schmeichel starter next season until he proves otherwise, and then have a quick hook. And minimally, Sinisalo should be the cup keeper next season.
So I was really talking about this season. I should have made that clearer.
Oh, okay.
I think we have to be very careful next season, because that absolutely crucial Champions League qualifier is going to come out quite soon, and I think you need to be very clear who's your number one for that. I don't want any fanning around with goalkeepers in time for that qualifier.
And as of now, I just saw this morning before we went to record. The way the seeding's falling right now, we are unseeded. Now, these things will change, and that depending on people, some of these teams might not get through qualifying round 2 to get into 3. But, like a month ago, we were looking at playing Ludogorets or, somebody like that, which again, not to belittle them or that level, but, because any team we're going to face is going to be a challenge. But that's different than playing Bodo Glimt or, some of the other teams that are going to be seeded, if Ferencváros, named from the blast in the past, these kind of teams that will probably just be that tier up as far as challenge. So I agree with you. Like this Champions League playoff round could be a very difficult tie. So we have to have multiple things in order. We can't be waiting until the last day to be signing all of our new players. So, although I'm not,
that definitely. I don't know where you've got that idea from, James. That's definitely not going to happen. That's definitely not going to happen. But yeah, no, I think Sinisalo, at the very least, has given me the optimism that we have another good goalkeeper on our hands. Given that before Joe Hart, I couldn't tell you who was a really excellent goalkeeper that we'd had. A lot of people will say Craig Gordon. I'm personally not on that train, but the fact that we've got 2 good goalkeepers potentially fighting out for the shirt next season is really exciting. James, I'll come back to you on the next point. First, we want to talk about, we've talked about some of the players that we missed, some of the players that didn't have great performances on Sunday, some of the players that did. A big miss for us, certainly for now and potentially for the majority of next season, is going to be Jota. For anybody who hasn't read the news, there is a suspicion that he could be out for up to 6 to 9 months, I think Brendan Rodgers said, with a knee injury that he injured in that league-winning game against Dundee United. First of all, I think it will be absolutely devastating for him to be in that position, having just got back into a squad where he can actually play football, having spent all that time in Saudi. I'm not entirely convinced that didn't actually have something to do with the injury, if he's potentially had a problem with getting back up to match fitness and things like that. But what's your take on Jota's injury and how it's going to affect us going into, if not the end of this season, certainly the start of next season?
Yeah, so when the incident happened, ACL jumped right into my head, and that's just from years of seeing people get their foot stuck in in turf across different sports. I mean, it's a common action that results in an ACL tear.
Very common in women's football. Almost above
even
the
more so, I
average
think,
compared to men's. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say even more so. So I didn't want to say anything because I didn't want to jinx it, but apparently it was, unfortunately. And the complicating factor, and again, Rogers isn't going to get into this, but there was some talk initially before the ACL news came out that there could be a meniscus issue. So that if it's both, which is not uncommon, when you get an ACL tear, that there could be some meniscus damage. That introduces all kinds of more complicating long-term issues as far as maintenance and inflammation. And people that have meniscus injuries oftentimes will have like a chronic swelling issue. So yeah, timeline of recovery, when they say 6 to 9 months, I mean, that usually the front end of that is more so just getting back to being able to do like full on training to a degree. That's not speaking to match fitness and, getting to a peak level of performance that they were pre-injury. So that could take a year. It could take, to get his lateral quickness and explosiveness and acceleration, which, to your point, Laura, I think he was still working back up to begin with, because he hadn't kind of fine-tuned that back in having a preseason and playing kind of consistent schedule. So yeah, I think realistically to get the old Jota back, which we haven't seen since he returned, like we're talking, and Jota before he left for Saudi Arabia, it may not happen next season. I mean, I think that's it has to be a realistic thought. I mean, I'd say who knows, but this is a major injury, and it's unlikely to occur where the recovery is linear and he doesn't have setbacks. And this is one of those kind of, like in baseball, it's the Tommy John surgery when they do the ligament replacement in the they put a pig's ligament in the elbow. And that's like the ACL of baseball. It takes 9 months to a year, and it's very kind of up and down as far as how people rebound from it and how they're able to persist once they do get back and having some setbacks, that kind of thing. So horribly unfortunate. Honestly, I mean, I think we've actually been pretty lucky as a club. Like the ACL is kind of a common injury within football, and I don't remember the last time we had a major, this catastrophic knee injury like this. We've had people with some chronic stuff like what was his Simonovic, and I think his was a meniscus, by the way. To give you an idea, like when guys get meniscus problems, it oftentimes will linger. So yeah, it's just horrible to see.
Yeah, Alan, it was quite evident when he went down that he was in a significant amount of discomfort, more so than, a slight twist of a joint or something like that. There was something seriously wrong, and I saw people trying to suggest that because he felt able to come out and celebrate on the pitch after the game, that would point towards a less serious injury. For me, as soon as I saw the brace and everything like that, I was just like, this is not good. In terms of next season, are we going to have to go out into the transfer market, do you think, to replace him, even if it's just with a loan for a season? Or, how do you think Brendan's going to handle this, considering it's maybe an area of the pitch he didn't think he would have to strengthen before that happened?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the prognosis is reasonable that because now he's going to miss another pre-season, right? And it's actually quite sobering to see how impactful it is not to have a pre-season, and how players struggle to actually get to the right level of fitness. Not every player. Some players are just naturally, very, very fit, like sort of Scott Brown. Some players, as we saw with Tom Rogic, took a long time to get up to match fitness from base fitness. I don't know about Jota, but yeah, when it happened, I had exactly the same thoughts as James, because it was an unnatural. It was an unnatural position for his leg to be in, his knee to be in, and this is where I get really annoyed with referees that don't penalise when players jump for the ball and somebody deliberately tries to hit somebody in midair without really going for the ball, causing them to then land on the ground in a very unnatural way. To me, it's a tremendously dangerous thing to do, and it should be something that football deals with better than it does. But it has a significant knock on, as you allude to there. For me, just it means that it's less likely we're going to see Maida as a striker, and I think that's a kind of that would be a mini tragedy if Rodgers thinks that he's going to mould Adam Idah into being as productive a player as Maida is as a striker. That to me is layered with risk and uncertainty. I think in Maida we could have a truly exceptional striker. All the data points to a very high IQ player and by those proxies, by those measures, you can't guarantee success. Can't guarantee that he's going to score 30 goals every season, but you can have a good chance of a consistent level of productivity because of the nature of Maida. And so Jota's injury kind of almost forces at the moment that he gets pushed left and we persist with Idah up front. And I just think that's a downgrade for the team in the short term. Whether that changes over the summer, we don't know. Jota's probably one of the top earners. I mean, the lad can't catch a break on the pitch. I mean, off the pitch, with his move to Saudi and to France and then back to Celtic, he's probably made for life. I mean, all those transfers and all for a big kind of fee, he's probably made a tremendous amount of money, but he's not having any joy at all on the actual football pitch, which, to be fair to him, he seems like an honest lad, is what he wants to do. So it's heartbreaking for him. I think it will be very disruptive to the team in the short term. I'll be interested to see how we approach that in terms of because, as I say, it just means that we're the risk that we end up in a situation like we did at the weekend, where we're having to flog James Forrest on one side and Idah as the striker, and if Maidah's not fully fit, and suddenly you've got a kind of broken attack. Really, it's just not functioning. So yeah, it's a big loss because although he was, as James always says, a compiler, and with that was a hint, is the implication that he did give the ball away a lot. He did sail shots over the bar. He did kick crosses into the stands. All of that is true, but he was also incredibly consistent in that. Yep. Amongst all that crap was a lot of good stuff, and the good stuff was consistent as much as the crap was. So you always got something out of him. So it is a big loss. It really is. So wish him well, but I think we need I think we do need to look at how we balance the attack for next season.
Well, to Alan's point, and it relates to your comment, Laura, is, Alan and I regularly talk about the concept of layering of risks, and how when you start layering risks, you get into, conceptually exponential math instead of linear math as far as how that manifests then. And this is an example of that, I think, because prior to that injury, we had risks of, okay, well, these are all risks. I'm not saying that they're going to manifest, but you only need, when you have multiple layers, you only need a couple of them to start manifesting, and all of a sudden, what hits the fan. So you've got a reasonable idea that Kuhn wants away. So he would need to be replaced theoretically. Maida may want to leave. That wouldn't be a shock given his kind of career timeline, how long he's been at Celtic. He's had an incredible season. He's done extremely well on the biggest stage in the Champions League. So again, I read a rumor today, Leeds might be looking at him. Would that be a shocker? Like that would actually be an ideal signing for Leeds. Someone going up in the Premier League trying to stay up is to have a profile of somebody like Maida who can do that kind of work defensively in a central role on a team that's going to, theoretically be a high press type of team. So all of a sudden, is Taylor going to be here or not? Is Tierney going to be able to stay fit? Is Engels going to launch into a second year where he makes big developmental moves? Or you start having would Johnston want to leave? Because again, he's been here where you would say, okay, well, he's ready for his big move. Is Carter Vickers going to want to leave? So now you have all these things where you've got this mature squad that's really in their life cycle, where most of them probably are looking for their next career move. They're at their age profile and been at Celtic long enough. And then you fall into that black hole. It's like, oh crap, we're not going to be able to replace all these guys, right? some of them are under long-term contracts, and then you get back into this issue of, unhappy people. And we saw that with Kyogo, where he wanted to leave last summer. It's not that he didn't put forth effort, but we talked about this a lot in recent months prior to him leaving. He just didn't quite seem on edge the way he had been. And it's that little 1 or 2% that can make that big of a difference. So now take Jota out of the equation. So that's like, it's already, we know that's a risk that's manifested. He's done at least until the beginning of next year. And that creates stressors on our decision-making in who to place where, who to sign, how to allocate resources, and all of these things, create risks that can manifest. So I think it's actually a hugely important factor relative to all these other things that are kind of latent and building on top of one another.
Yeah, and I don't want to sort of go overboard on the worry-warting here, but the last comment I was going to make on this was really about injuries this season, where I think we have been probably fortunate. Now, maybe we could give credit to the club for conditioning, sports science,
rotation,
recovery, yep, and all that, and some good rotation by Rodgers. But I think, as I've said a number of times on the programme, we're still fundamentally relying on about 17 players. It's that magic number. It's what Ange did. And Ange wasn't here long enough that he could change that and deepen the squad. It happened with Rodgers before he left. Essentially got 17 players. Now, Johnson's missing. Carter Vickers looks like he's going to miss games before the cup final. Jota's got a really bad injury. Suddenly key players now who have been pivotal to that big long run in the middle of the season when we had all these games. We were playing twice a week on horrible pitches and we kept grinding out wins. At the end of the season, they're done. The injuries start to manifest, and suddenly, you're throwing in Ralston, you're throwing in, we love James Forrest, but he's 33 now. He's not the same James Forrest he was when he was 27, 28. Greg Taylor's still there. We've got Scales back in, and suddenly it's like, So in terms of again to that theme of risk upon risk upon risk. It's just something else that really need to think about. That I don't think the squad depth and quality is there, and there's a bunch of players that are on loan that need to come back. So there's still, and I've talked about this every summer, there's still a job to do to prune out a lot of players, really make space for. We can get to the stage where we've got at least 20, 21, 22 players that we're quite happy are not are at least comparable when you're swapping them in and out.
Is Marco Tilio still one of our players?
Still on the books.
Oh, yes.
Oh, my God. I mean, what's the chances of him and Odin Thiago Holm cementing a place in the team next season? And,
Well, Holm's gone through the MLS season, so he's not even coming back for preseason. So he's in LA until January. So he's out. Yeah, Tilio probably not. And then you've got Lagerbielke, and then some other youth guys that have been in Austria, that type of thing. So, yeah, there's a lot
it's
of
grim, is what it is. It's utterly grim. But
it's normal, but sometimes it happens all at once.
That's the big concern is when these things are kind of building up and they tend to manifest all of a sudden out of nowhere, seemingly.
Yeah, we'll just need to, as they say, we'll need to cross that particular bridge when we come to it. To close out the show, James, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about your article from this week. For anybody who doesn't know already, although I'm sure if you're listening to this you do, Alan and James provide weekly content on thehuddlebreakdown.com where they dive into a little bit more depth on some of the issues that we touch on in the podcast. All the footballing ones, none of the other stuff, obviously. James, you wrote a pretty interesting article this week about comparing where we're at in terms of quality this season, or basically over the last 14 years compared to, with the exception of that one sort of anomalous season 2020-21.
We won't talk about that.
Yeah, where basically the world fell out of all our backsides. What were your findings researching that? Has there been any particular change in the overall quality of what we've seen comparing, say, Dyla and Rodgers or Ange in that sense?
Yeah, so the trend was very kind of specific in that there was a leap from the Dyla era to when Rodgers arrived the first time. And really what I try to do is think about an attribution framework. So to assign why we perform in certain ways at certain levels and then what the trends are over time. And so there's various things, XG differential, and Alan's talked about it quite a lot in the past, expected points, which is basically allocating points based off of models that are probabilistic based off of XG, right? And then what I've done is build a lot of modeling on variability, how much of the normal variance in the sport. That's why XG is only a guide. Results over a significant amount of time, even as long as a season, can diverge quite a bit from XG at times. So Lawrence Shanklin's season last year, we talked about a lot. These types of things. So it happens on the player level, it happens at the team level, and so some of the bigger trends that there was that jump from Dyla to Rodgers. I would argue a big chunk of that was because we spent about $15 to $20 million pounds more on wage bill in that transition. Some of that for Rodgers, but also a big chunk of that for higher quality players like Sinclair and Dembele. And then we've kind of been in that range since then. As far as, the way I characterize is basically average expected points per game. And we've kind of been in that 2.1 to 2.3 area in most seasons. And that's where we're at again this season. We've kind of bumped up the high end seasons were 2021, 22 under Ange, and then the 1920 season, the aborted season under Lenny, when like our talent was crazy that season. Remember, you go back to that team and you look at actually where those players are now, Frimpong, Ayer, even El Yunusi, Edouard, and a lot of these guys went on to play in the Premier League at least. So the really stacked team. Forster still in a prime at keeper. So we're pretty much bumped up against that again this season, like in that upper threshold within our normal range, which is good. This is all good news. The question is that high range at potential? I would argue we're not quite there. I mean, if you look at other teams in unipolar leagues that have dominated like we have over that 14-year period, if you look in Croatia or Serbia, for example, where you've got generally unipolar leagues, they typically are a notch up from where we are. I think that also correlates with them generally being a little better in Europe over a lot of that time. And I use those as a kind of benchmarks in the sense that they're also not widely known to be clubs that have massively adopted analytics. So they're still kind of operating in the prehistoric world like we are in many ways as far as how they operate football operations. But probably most importantly, as we head towards next season, the big gap. So this is all kind of positive in the sense that we're chugging along within our normal band. The big difference this season was just how much of a total joke Rangers were. So basically Rangers performed at a level this season that was pretty close to the 18-19 season, which was Gerrard's first. And you say, oh, well, that they spent 20 million pounds less on wages that season than they're probably going to this season. I have to estimate that, but they've, as Alan's pointed out, they've had austerity this season because of FSR, probably also part of the impetus for them going for some kind of change in strategic control to recapitalize. So for them to, waste 20 million pounds more on wages and to get the same level of kind of underlying performance as they did in 18-19 just speaks to really how bad they've been. And domestically, and even more so, like orders of magnitude worse than we were in 2020, 2021. Like as bad as that felt to us at the time, they are by a good distance worse in that drop off than we were in that season. So is that going to be sustainable? Right. So we look at competitive dynamics. So we're kind of chugging along. We talk about risks. We're entering in summer now where we have all these layering of risks. And you've got two potential major change agents in the competitive dynamics. One, there was the press release today by Hearts that it looks like they're moving forward, at least at soliciting a vote with their shareholders for Bloom to take an official just under 30% equity stake in Hearts, non-voting equity stake. But one would think if they're doing that, he's not going to be involved unless he's going to have a controlling operational interest. And then it still looks more likely than not. Again, it's not saying, we've been talking about it for literally months now, that it may not fall apart at the end, but it looks more likely than not, at least in my judgment, that a change of control is going to happen at Rangers. So I don't think they can be anywhere near as bad. Like they could spend, this is ignoring any kind of injection of capital. They could just spend the same amount they do this season, and it'll be hard for them to be this bad going forward in how pathetic their performance levels have been this season. And the guy that they've hired as their new director of football coming out of Everton, and if you look at his CV, like he looks, like at least a competent guy. He may not be an earth shaker like Bloom, but at least someone who's more likely than not to do things okay, at least. And they're so far from okay this season. It's been wonderful to witness and enjoy, but not likely to persist.
Yeah, Alan, I think the thing that I took away from what James is saying there, and from what the base of the article is, it's less about where we are in comparison to ourselves over the last 14 years, and actually more about how far ahead of Rangers we need to stay to maintain the success that we've had. If they sort themselves out over the summer miraculously and then become far better than they have been, and a much more well-oiled machine, we're going to be in trouble, because, as you often say, the turnaround and the closing of that gap is often much quicker than people like to admit that it's going to be.
Yeah, and it was that latter point, Laura, that I wanted to kind of qualify a little bit. So my comments that I wanted to make weren't sort of to critique or anything like that James's piece. It's a really good piece, and I commend everyone to read it. It was more supplementary. What we could look at next. I think James covered the point that I'd love to see the benchmarking around other clubs in Europe, and therefore those Celtic values. What does good look like? What should we aspire to be? I think that'd be a really interesting analytical question. And then the second thing that occurred to me in reading it, and to your point that you've just made there, and which James is absolutely right, and I think I've been making the same points about, this is more fragile than the commercial differential would suggest, right? Because of the general lack of competitiveness in the rest of the league, and we've seen over the last 34 derbies now, how the XG differential in those games is wafer thin, right? And even a poor Rangers side under Ned Ball is still, effectively achieved performance parity with Celtic because of the style of play matchup that it is. They can't beat St Mirren, they can't beat Motherwell. That's a huge problem, and that's why they've lost the league, right? And fixing that isn't going to be easy. But the point I wanted to make really was the one concept I wanted to introduce. And James wasn't trying to project forward. He wasn't trying to predict the future. He set up there what might happen next season, and that's how my head was going. James wasn't trying to do that. So this isn't a criticism. It's just things to think about. And then the concept I'd want to put in your head is margin of error, right? And this speaks back to the disastrous season that Celtic had. What Celtic do have in terms of, because of their commercial, all of the advantages that they have, is they have significantly more margin for error for when things go badly wrong, which in football clubs they do. 2021 was spectacular in terms of the things that could go wrong. But listen, it happened. It happened then. You could argue it happened under Mowbray. So we've lived through two of these in recent times, which means that, what are the odds of it happening in the next five or so years, right? Probably quite high, I would argue. The thing to bear in mind is that Celtic have significantly better margin for error to recover from that, and that was evidenced again in the time. We recovered with Postecoglou. We got a good manager in. We recruited smartly, and we were back on track again. whatever happens at the Rangers, that they have a significantly less margin for error. They could overtake Celtic one season, but can they do it the second season? Can they do it the third season? Can they do it the fourth season? They may sort out their recruitment. The recruitment could be genius. They could get the best analytics, but all that will happen is then it will emerge that the players that they've bought are really good. They'll get sold quicker, and a lot of the money will be trousered by some American with big pockets, and it won't go back into the football club. And they'll try and recruit, with cheaper players, and that cycle is doable. And Bloom has shown it can be done, but it's incredibly difficult, and you've got to hit the mark season after season after season after season. The margin of error is very, very low. So I just wanted to make that point. I don't know how we would model that in, but it might be something we're thinking about.
Indeed it would. That's plenty of food for thought, I think, for all of us over the summer, depending on what happens across the city, and indeed, perhaps more importantly, what happens within the halls of Celtic Park. James, Alan, it's been another wonderful week. The season may be coming to an end, but the content on thehuddlebreakdown.com and on the podcast will be continuing for some time yet. So please make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel, give us a like, maybe a wee comment down below, and subscribe to the website as well to get a full gamut of all the content that we are providing for you. Alan and James, you'll be back later in the week with Martin for the podcast, and I will see everybody again next week.